Alrighty. Alright, everyone. Welcome to our June Dynamics 365 user group. It's cool that we're broadcasting live now. So, fairly simple agenda for tonight. Food and drinks and networking. It's good to see some new faces tonight. Networking's definitely happening, which is good. Thanks, Peter, for organising the food and drinks. That's good. We'll go through some introduction formalities, quick one tip, and then the main event, which is pretty much going to be the guts of this session today. So, put on your seat, Cameron and Stephen can take us through with the stuff they've taken away from the business summit. And then questions and answers. So if you're a customer or have any questions, feel free to ask as many questions as you want. Okay, so just like to acknowledgement of the country. Wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Wadeka people of the Noongar Nation, and pay respect to elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, as well as acknowledge the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. Okay, so just a few notice board things. In August, 21st to the 23rd is the customer section of the Australian Microsoft Business Application Summit. The 20th, which is a Tuesday, is also for partner training as well. Anyone who's watching online and here today gets access to this special code. I hope you haven't bought it yet. This will get you 25% off the actual cost. Maybe see if we can get a discount with that. So this applies to user group members. Maybe
just cancel that.
You can get, there's a $50 refund. There's a $50 refund fee, which you can do up until the 12th of July.
Yeah.
So you might find 25% of whatever cost you may would probably be a couple $100. So it might be worth paying the 50 and then doing that again. If that's worst case scenario, you might be able to get credit.
There's a lot of people from product group coming over to actually present on that. Good, so again, if we've got any customers here that potentially would like to meet with particular areas, then again, let me know. I can't promise anything. We don't know exactly who's here yet, but we're trying to, because it's rare that we get them across into Australia. We're keen to try and get them meeting with customers. So
yeah, there's quite a few people going. I'm going as well, thanks to the company I work for with Precision. Okay. All right. So a quick one tip times two. It is around the AI builder. Peter's kindly sent through some YouTube links. So normally we get someone to present, but the videos here do it quite well. So I thought we'd just go with that. So if I click on this, hopefully it'll take us out to YouTube. And Okay, so that was one of the first links. Let's just bring up the next one. It's also to do with the AI build, and this was, I think, Peter, you said was a good. Yeah, just excuse me for that.
Lucky it was a good video.
Yeah. This is a use case. Oh, cool. So that video just goes on how to build what you just saw there. Alrighty, so I think the sound issue's sorted for now.
Yeah, it's just a video.
Yeah, just a video audio. All right, we'll sort that out next time. All right, cool. So that brings us to the end of the one tip. I think we're now go straight into the presentation. Cool.
All right.
You guys.
So hopefully I'm coming across okay. So I'm Stephen Brady, and I'm with Cameron Robertson. You can see kind of our faces painted on the background there. We went to Atlanta for the Microsoft Business Application Summit, and we were joined by Khalil Khan, who heads up our modern workplace, and Dave Conti, who I'm backfilling for today, who's actually a Dynamics specialist. So my background's more in cloud services and in business applications. So I have a vested interest in Dynamics because I interact with it quite a bit, and I'm also heavily involved in Dynamics delivery. So things around field service, project service automation, CDS, Power Apps. Those were kind of my interest areas. And then Cameron Robinson, I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, so my area, met some of you before, but certainly Dynamics 365, but a very strong emphasis towards finance and operations, ERP finance, and so on.
So I'll probably start off with the areas kind of I followed around the business applications area. So I was based in Atlanta, which was nice, but it rained for 5 days, which it wasn't as special. And there was a lot of topics. There were about 4,000 to 5,000 people there, and the convention centre was probably about 2 kilometres long. So you did a lot of walking backwards and forwards into particular subject areas. So trying to get to all the essentially workshops was quite difficult. So you kind of had to focus what stream you were interested in and target that as much as you can. Otherwise, you'll jump in literally from building to building, which was a block away. So the ones that interested me, and I'll do a bit of a talk around, it was the field services roadmap. I've got a keen kind of interest in that area. We do a lot of field services work at the moment on our end. So for my personal space, this was quite an intriguing space. Scheduling. So if you've ever used a schedule board in Dynamics, anything around work orders and those kind of things, online, offline mode, if you're using the Resco Field Services app and all those kind of things, scheduling is a big part of that. It keeps changing on me. So I've been through a few upgrades of field services recently, and every time the schedule board kind of goes through a few, let's call it iterations. So how to schedule work orders, is the schedule board the right way, or is there other ways? In those other ways, how does AI play into it? So the scheduling process itself, I was kind of interested to see what was on the roadmap and where they were going to take it. There was about 3 good presentations on the Business Application Summit that's on that. You can actually find a lot of those talks online at the moment, some really good videos. They had a lot of the product group there talking specifically about it, and some black belts as well that have implemented it on the field. So the product group generally are looking to, let's call it, fast track the delivery of it, but how do you use it in the wild? This is where the black belts are actually trying to apply those new scenarios into the real world. So there was a good presentation on that and how they actually introduced some of those field services and the scheduling specifically into the wild, which was kind of cool. And then me personally, I've got a lot of background in data. So anything around data model piqued my interest. So the common data model, if you've not heard about it, I'll talk a little bit more about it. But it underpins a lot of what you'll hear out of the common data services. The common data services is a kind of an end-to-end black box solution at the moment, but underpinning that is the common data model, and where they're taking that, so Azure Data Lake Storage, extension into industry-specific terms as well. So at the moment they've got healthcare, they've got not-for-profits, they've got education, and they're building in preview at the moment banking that'll tie into finance. So if you're doing anything around Business Central or FinOps, this will be an interesting area in the next 12 months. So just understanding what it is, how you can get your hands on it, where it's going, and then how it impacts CDS is kind of important. And then that ties into Power Apps. So your world of Power Apps, if you use CDS appropriately, it's quite simple. So fast tracking your Power Apps development with CDS allows you to get to different connections and data sources real quick. And again, with the data lake interactions with CDS and the common data model, all of a sudden your Power BI becomes a simpler solution as well. So I was kind of interested in that, how Power BI uses data flow. And data flow is your way to connect multiple data sources, transform that data, and present it back into multiple Power BI dashboards and tiles without having to do a full ETL process. So if you've done a lot of work in actually bringing data sets together and then surfacing them, it's quite painful. If that's not your space, how do you do it quickly? Well, data flows abstracts a lot of that transform layer. It also separates how you present that in workspaces. So you can have your data flows in a Power BI workspace separated from your Power BI report and use that one flow across 4 or 5 Power BI reports, which actually is a big deal if you've done a lot of that work. If you haven't, well, it's probably a boring talk. And then flow, I didn't attend a lot on the flow, more on the peripheral, but there were some good talks on flow with Azure and integration services. So how do you use flow, but still make use of logic apps and APIs and data grid and all those kind of beautiful things. So where flow came into interest with me was more, so a logic app can't do a push notification, for example, into a Power App. So if I've got a logic app that's doing some transforms and I want to send that event and push a notification to a Power App, there's no direct connection from there to your Power App. So you can actually get logic apps to call flow, and then flow can do a push notification to your Power App. So this kind of thing was kind of cool. I've done a bit of that before, so I just wanted to see where flow kind of fit into that world with logic apps and where the handover was. But the events and all those that go around that was kind of cool. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and jump on my phone because I've got all my notes. So the roadmap for field services. So this was one of the workshops I went, or presentations I went with Ben Vollmer and Carl Young presenting. I thought this would be pretty cool because they should know what's on the roadmap for field service, you'd imagine. The talk was BRK 2020, so if anyone wants to watch the video, jump onto that and watch it. But some of the cool points that they were talking about were these areas here. So the improvements in scheduling to meet new demand. So they've done a lot of feedback essentially in this space, where the pain points are in scheduling, how they can make it easier, how they can tie that back into remote assist, how they can tie that back into the what-if analysis and single resource optimization. So that was a kind of a cool kind of area of it. So multi-requirement scheduling. So it's been about, crews have been about, resource pools have been about. So these aren't new, but what they're doing with them, there's some advanced techniques now that are going to make it easier. The key part for me was, if I'm not a heavy schedule board user and I just want to quickly find the appropriate resource with a couple of clicks without having to go to the schedule board, see who's available and what time, can't we use something to quickly just present that to us? So single resource optimization, that process, that engine, that was a really cool benefit for it. So if I've got my work order, I can just go into the schedule assist and it will do who's available, whether it's a crew, a person, or a pool of people, tie them into what skills they need using the incident types and your characteristics, and go, these are the people that are available, the times they're available, and I can just quickly, with 2 clicks of a button, go, this work order is now scheduled with the appropriate resource. So for me, this was high on the roadmap. Remote assist was another thing that they talked about quite a bit. So you've got, let's call it the 3D models, and you've probably seen the HoloLens 2 and all those kind of things there, but you don't have to use those tools. You can actually just download the app on your phone. It's a 2D representation of it, but you can still do all the features that you could do on your HoloLens there. So then all of a sudden becomes quite practical. Most people have a phone, most people can make a call, most people can make a Skype or Teams connection, and we can use remote assist to work out, well, who was the last person to work on something and how can they help me fix a particular issue that I've got out in the field. We talked a little bit, or asked questions after the session about where field service and Resco was going. So there's probably a topic of interest with some of the new things that we're discussing. Power apps as well, going online, offline capabilities. Where does Resco, kind of that app, fit into that world? From the short conversation or response was, in the next 18 months, Resco is still going to be the back-end supplier to that. So very much still a player in there. So that was kind of interesting to see where that played with some of these new features that are coming out. The other thing was a FinOps integration and how work order assignments and those kind of things are going to feed into finance and operations and where that handover and crossover is. So that was kind of cool. And then the 4 areas that they sort of bucketed everything under was around productivity for a technician. So this ties into channels into field services. So how can we make technicians more productive? And there's a whole range of kind of areas that they're looking at doing to help technicians get on site appropriately. So things like if a work order gets scheduled and it needs someone to bring a ladder, and it also needs specific tools to work on it, and they need specific access to get into that particular room, how can they make sure that that multi-resource scheduling with that crew is available for them to get on site? How do we use IoT and those kind of supplementary services to automate some of that? Internet of Things then ties into that, scheduling, and then field service for customer services. So that whole talk took about an hour, and then they sort of hung around for another 20 minutes discussing these various points. So it's probably one of the better talks that I went to during the summit, and definitely a lot of new information coming in the next 12 months in that space. Anyone got any questions on that? Anything specific? No?
With the scheduling stuff, the capacity scheduling and the facility scheduling, I've always struggled to get my head around, if I've got a room that can hold 10 people and I want to allocate who those 10 people are to that room, have they done anything to make that easier?
So not really, but they're doing capacities on there. So I wouldn't say it was easier, but you can actually, with the rooms and the bookings, so they did an example with the hotels. So if I've got 100 rooms, and let's say there's 2 people to each of those rooms, making sure that you can't go over capacity. This was something they built in, but I think that's more in the AI. So you've got to be on the latest versions, but it didn't look like it. There was more of a talk with, and I'll go through this one in the next one, which was around the scheduling. And in here, these 2 guys, James Bowen and Marcio Ducat, talked a little bit more around scheduling, because that's kind of where it fit in, was around, if I've got a particular resource, and the resource could be a room, and that resource has characteristics which could be the size of that room, then how do I schedule a person against those things that meets those characteristics? And you can kind of play around with that, but they didn't go specifically into that scenario with the hotels, which would have probably tied into that.
Well, my example, I've got like, Venues West want to book their swimming schools. So they've got a particular class, they've got an instructor, and they've got capacity for 5 kids in that class, 5 different customers.
Yeah.
So there you're wanting to drag
the other way around. Yeah.
onto the work order, not allocate a work order
to the customer. That's right.
And I keep nagging Ben about it, but I just want to check I hadn't missed anything. No. So when I call them in ready, I don't make an idiot of myself because they've already announced it. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
No, none of that, not the other way around, no.
So Steve, the last one, which F&O one, what is they are saying about that?
I won't steal too much of Cam's thunder, but ultimately it's the CDS components to it. So some of the work that's going to get done with the finance and operations is very much centered around the common data model and then the CDS connectors from out of that. So that's where the most of the work is going to be done, and it's on that operations side, because ultimately your work orders and how you execute those work orders needs to feed back into your finance and operations side, so that if a person goes out to a site, completes that work order, we then want to send an invoice to say this work's completed. And if we can get that near real time, that's where some of the joint work has been done with the finance and operations and the field services team, which is something that they'd sort of been doing separately for a while. Finance and operations is going down one path, field services is going down the other. Now those two product groups are talking a lot more to each other, and it's around this area here. And it's actually starting off by defining the common data model. So when we talk about a work order in field services, what are we talking about on the other end for finance and operations? And essentially that common data model, and I'll go through this in a little bit, defining the common language between those, because the actual org structure or the entity model is very different between the two. So a work order here isn't the same object as it is over there. And the common data model is the way you actually bring those two languages together. So this is where it's quite interesting, but I'll go through that in a bit. So park that question, ask me again, make sure I answer it in the next one, because it's the slide after this, and it's a topic I love talking about. So the scheduling processor, this particular talk, and I'll just jump on my thing so I can get the right version. But yeah, this particular talk was by James Bowen. I've lost my thing on my phone. James Bowen and Mark said they're both black belts in field services, so their day and life is fully immersed in that space for field services. And the scheduling, quick scheduling, was actually where I found the most value. So it combines data and AI with your schedule board without having to actually go into your schedule board. You can essentially just trust that it's worked through all the work orders that are coming through, and it actually just surfaces up exactly which resources, and that could be a crew, it could be a resource pool or a specific resource, what availability they have, how many people are available at that time, so which slots are the most open. And essentially with 2 clicks, I can go, I have this work order, and I don't need to be a resourcing scheduling specialist. I can literally just go, here's my work order, I want to do a quick booking, who's available, and just let the system provide me recommendations on who that is. Or I can then override those recommendations and choose a specific crew. So I might know a little bit more and know that crew A costs me a little bit more than crew B. Okay, I'll choose those. Or I might know nothing and I can just do a quick schedule. So at least I now know that that's booked and that's handled. And maybe my resource and scheduling specialist can come in there and play with it later. But I found this is really, from an impressive perspective, this was quite impressive. And that presentation James Bowen presented on was, yeah, worth a watch, absolutely. Other topics that they covered was around optimal resource and time slots. So this kind of fed into, if I've got lots of crews, those crews operate, let's say, in shifts to work out what's the optimal shift for that particular crew. And if I have a particular member within that crew that belongs to multiple crews, so I might work in crew A and crew C, and I cross over for 4 hours of my shift, this can actually work that out as well. So I can tie shifts to my crews as well. So this was something that you couldn't do before, that's now quite useful. So previously I would have had to fix who's in that crew, and that person belongs to one crew and that's it. Now I can say one person can belong to multiple crews, but at different time frames. So my crews can then become slightly dynamic in that sense. I thought this was fantastic, because in the real world, that's kind of what happens. I'm not fixed to a particular crew. I actually are going, depending on my shift, I'm going to join different crews during my day. It ties into the quick scheduling, but ultimately it's for my heavy resourcing, where I have one particular resource that doesn't quite fit into that shape. That let's say I've got crews of 3, and I've got 3 crews but 10 people. I've got one person sort of floated in between one or the other, or if I've got someone that's off sick and I've got to quickly bring someone in for that day. This is where it becomes very interesting. So it ties into multi-resourcing schedule, crews and pools. So for me, this topic was quite interesting, and definitely that session was well presented. So definitely worth looking into.
Can the crews also include non-human resources?
Yeah, so your crews can be facilities, it could be ladders, it could be a room, it could be a truck that you need, transport. So your resource doesn't have to be a person resource, it can be a physical resource. And things like skills as well, you can use skills for things like access to a room. So if my cleaner needs to have access to a server room, and they need a specific swipe, but another cleaner doesn't have that swipe card, I can differentiate those people by using access through skills and characteristics. So using characteristics in that way is quite useful as well. So not only do they need to bring these kind of things, but badges or ID or specific access to rooms and floors and those kind of things there. Or even if they need after hours, so they've only got access between 9 and 5, and then they need to do after hours scheduling. You can actually add those to the skills, and it will determine those things as well, which is kind of interesting. You can do those kind of things now, but the AI components to the quick scheduling will take those into account as well. Yeah.
Can you do like blocking? So for example, in Australia, you have working condition. You cannot put more than 12-hour shift.
Right, fatigue management. Yeah. No, I didn't. No, I don't believe so. But I didn't get that question answered. So fatigue management component to access a building. I don't think you can.
You have staff available hours.
Yeah.
You can set as a constraint, but if you've got more complex, like, if you work 12 hours, you have to have 8 hours break before you work again, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, minimum lunch break.
No, I don't believe so. I think you'd have to build that in. Yeah. Done a few fatigue management things in the past, and they can get quite complex.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
How well optimized is quick booking? I mean, I say I have a work order between 2 requirements.
Yeah.
Will it try to apply resources with exact 2 requirements?
Yeah.
Or will it just give me people with 2, 3 requirements, because people with 3 requirements may be more costly than 2?
Yeah, so it's going to match those requirements exactly how they are. So it's an and condition. So if
overqualified resources be suggested as well?
Yeah, I believe so. It'll bring back everyone that can do that particular piece of work.
Okay, so
yeah,
it's really aimed at where people have all got the same skills. So I need a salesperson to go and see something.
Yeah.
I'm not looking at their skills. I just want to book an appointment with them quickly. That was the initial focus.
It's basically for the person that doesn't care so much about the specifics of the schedule. They just need it scheduled. So the quick assist is there for the non-resource manager. So your resource manager will absolutely be going onto their schedule board and then resourcing appropriately there. This is more for helping the help desk quickly dispatch or make sure a work order at least has someone looking into it, and then a resource manager would absolutely have to go to the resource schedule board and go through those to optimize it.
So I guess the listing order of the resources don't really matter.
No. Yeah. So it's probably not everyone's favorite topic here, but this was mine. So most of my sessions were centered around the common data model. They didn't necessarily talk specifically just on the common data model, but was more how the common data model is applied to different areas. So the basic concepts of CDS are built on top of common data model. So the CDS right now, the common data services, is quite a complex beast itself. So it brings into the fold the data connectors, the data integration. It's got a database components to it, and it understands specific source systems. But where it actually comes to life is through the common data model. Now, there are industry accelerators based on the common data model that will help you shape what let's say you've got a customer in Dynamics and you've got a person in Salesforce, but we're talking about healthcare. You want those 2 things to actually mean patient. because you don't have a customer at a hospital, you have a patient at a hospital. So all of a sudden you can use the common data model through those industry accelerators and change the meaning or the definition of customer, so that when I'm reporting against it or when I'm interacting with my patient system, I can actually make my Dynamics CE or my Salesforce tie directly into that industry-specific patient system using its terminology. And this is where the common data model comes into play. So the way it does it is it has its own language, and it's based that language, essentially the language is JSON scripts, but what it uses to tag your entities and your attributes within your entities is a thing called traits. So traits is a really key topic or term within that common data model. So this is kind of interesting. So what you'd end up saying is my database would mean or would be tied to a specific industry, and let's say it's healthcare. Then my entities within that would mean something, and then my attributes are something. So I could basically say my customer means patient for healthcare, and then within that, my name and my field for name might be full name in one system, and it might be surname in another. I can actually give that a trait that says full name here and full name there. So now all of a sudden I've got two different source systems with two different ways of representing a customer and their name. But in the common data model, my schema is now going to be using this terminology to bring those two systems together. So it almost determines your transform path between those two systems mapped using this common data model. Now, once I've got this mapped and understood in that way through traits, I can then quickly push over the top of that a CDS, my CDS connectors, to say consume this common data model using those traits so that I can actually dump that into Azure Data Lake. And the Azure Data Lake will store that data in a folder in that terminology. So it won't store it as customer and it won't store it as person. It will now store it as patient. So in my data lake, I now have a patient entity that brings together those two entities into one. And then I can get through data flows, I can surface that up to Power BI as my list of patients, or into my Power App, or into whatever my patient administration system is, just through that mechanism. And all I would have done is just described what my common entities are in JSON format in the common data model. And all of a sudden, I've now just done integration between two different systems without a lot of transform and ETL processing. Now, the other advantage to the common data model, one is that, yes, the data lake understands it. And I'll get to that in a little bit more. But also things like Databricks. So if you've ever heard of that term, it's quite a powerful tool, Databricks. Part of what Databricks also is an integration tool. So it allows you to, through batch processing, pull data out of one particular system and move it somewhere else. Using the common data model, which Databricks intrinsically understands already, I then can just point it at my source system, say that this source system is described by this common data model, and it will automatically understand it. So all of a sudden, all that mapping that you would normally have to do manually is automatically done. And I can use Databricks then to feed it into two different places, my PAS system and also into my data lake, which is kind of cool. Now, once it's in my data lake, I can all of a sudden then pass CDS onto it. And once I'm in the CDS world, anything that's in that Dynamics or Power Apps world, all of a sudden I can talk to it, because I've already got my connectors from FinOps, from, well, not quite Business Central yet, but from whatever Dynamics systems I've got, including Power Apps, I can then consume CDS from it. So just through that mechanism, I'm now talking to my PAS system, I'm talking to my CE system, I'm talking to my FinOps system, but ultimately I'm talking to a central place. So if you've ever worked with operational data stores are your transactional live systems. It's the precursor normally to a data warehouse. Some people just use it for staging, but it's that intermediary area where I can bring lots of systems into one place and essentially do this work. Back in the day, this used to be months and months of work. Now with these industry accelerators that you can basically go to GitHub, download, and all of a sudden start talking the language of healthcare, education, not-for-profits, you take essentially months of work and negotiations between different parties to say, well, what is this attribute? What does this entity mean across my business? All of a sudden I've got that. So my transform discussions all of a sudden become smaller, and my interactions between multiple systems become simpler. Now, there's only so many systems that are consuming or working with the common data model, but it's getting bigger and bigger. So the more contributors there are to the common data model project, which is on GitHub, the quicker this is going to expand. So whilst they've got those industry accelerators right now, that's going to grow pretty quickly. The amount of entities they're discussing is going to grow quickly. And the other beauty is you can dive into that world right now, download it and extend it if you understand JSON and the new language of the common data model. So they've introduced this new language, and essentially the key player in that, if you understand what a trait is in their world, which is essentially just metadata against your attributes and your entities and so on. Once you understand that model there, you can start extending it yourself, which is actually quite cool, because that's for me, quite powerful. Now, if you're in the Power BI world and you've seen data flows, so previously, if you've worked with Power BI, you would have worked with dashboards, reports, and data. Data flow is now the fourth component to Power BI. And what it allows you to do, and again, it reads from CDS, but it also understands the common data model, and it'll also plug directly into Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 as well. Using the common data model as a key player in that. The beauty of data flows is, one, I can get to multiple source systems into one. Previously, I would have had to build that outside of it through analysis services or some type of data warehouse. Now I can do that through point and click into a data model. The other part is I can abstract away from my Power BI this data flow and use it across multiple Power BI versions. So for me, this then becomes quite a repeatable pattern, because how many times have you created a Power BI report and you've got that data set and you want to reuse it? You have to spin off and click here, and all of a sudden you've lost your life cycle of that data set. Data flows keeps that life cycle going and essentially becomes the central point to whatever your Power BI reports are going to be if you're trying to target different users and roles. So I thought this was really good. There was about 5 or 6 topics on this. I went to 3 of them, and there's some really good presentations on the online as well. So
part of the longer term plan with that is, Microsoft or partners will start producing templates, whether it's Power BI dashboards for patient reporting or AI models, for example. And then Microsoft is also will probably bring in its Bing database as well. So if I've got a customer entity, actually I know where they live, I can bring in a whole load of demographic data about that area and census data and other stuff. So we're looking at kind of automated enrichment of data. By bringing it into a common model, we can infer a lot of additional value.
Yeah, this is really going to be for the business or the power user, this is going to be a game changer for mine anyway.
Is it only retrieve, or can we update as well?
Yeah, so kind of the way it's going to do it is it won't override your initial folder. So in the Azure world, what it'll end up doing is creating copies. So as you dump your data into one common data model folder, and then you want to update it, it'll just create a symbiotic folder for it. So it won't clash your information. So it'll just keep extending those folders, and essentially your folders will go into a folio of things, so that it's almost stapled together. Using Databricks, it will kind of abstract that from you anyway, which is kind of cool. So you don't have to exactly worry about where this is getting stored, because it will bring that back out from the APIs. So that's kind of how I've understood it.
So are you using those as a snapshot, a point in time snapshot?
Kind of, yeah.
Just one question, if I understood it, like essentially the whole exercise around this common data model is to come up with a specification that are domain specific, and as such, while all along different people have different names or schemas to represent that, what you are trying to do is to collate essentially a schema, and then it, like systems will be just pointing to those schemas, and then they become neutral. You are not doing a whole lot of exercises to what is that.
Correct. So essentially you'll have your schema, and for those online, you can't see my hand, but bad luck. So essentially you'll have your schema here, you'll have your systems there, and what you'll basically do is these will have your traits, and you'll say this attribute in this system for this entity means surname here, and that same trait is represented in this system by this entity and this attribute there. And this will be stored in your common data model. Now, each system needs to, play the game. So not every system in the world is doing that just yet. They've invited SAP, Salesforce, Dynamics, Adobe. So they're all invited into this game. There's also, from an industry perspective, KPMG, Avanade, and so on, that are helping describe from an industry perspective what the common terminologies or traits should be on that side of it. So that way each system or player in the game will understand each industry and go, okay, well, we have address line 3. For this industry, it's going to mean city, but for this other one, it's going to mean my mailing address or whatever it's going to be. So for industry-specific terminology, that common data model will be slightly different. And those players in the game are going to build over time, because as it gets more popular and more contributors to those systems start winning more projects because they're involved in the common data model, you'll find everyone else will fall in line. So you'd imagine over the next 12 months, once this starts becoming a hot topic and the oracles of the world start missing out because they're not in the common data model game, they'll have to follow suit at some point. And really, it's not owned by any particular person, the common data model. It's on GitHub. Anyone can contribute to it. Anyone can download it and go, well, this is how we're going to use the common data model. So there's no real control. It's not controlled by Microsoft or Adobe or SAP. It's a partnership, and that partnership can extend and grow. So it's not a technology as such, but it is a language, and it is almost an agreement and a partnership. So everyone has to really play together, otherwise it doesn't work. Yeah.
So the skeptic in me tells me that this is EDR 20 years later. Because this sort of concept was around 20 years ago.
Yeah. It's
just a zooped up version of it.
Absolutely. So I think the advantage here is those players are in the game now. SAPs and Adobe's and Microsoft's of the world playing together. If they're playing together, that's good news for everyone else.
The 10 to 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think just on that, I think 20 years ago there was a big gap between this concept and the end users and the business users, and you had to have a lot of technical people in the middle. I think now we're starting to see these domain model type of scripters, like it wasn't GitHub and what happened 20 years ago, is now it's almost at our fingertips for the average person. Business
Microsoft's a different beast. Sony now, we signed a deal with Oracle the other day to link our data centers together. I mean, I thought hell had frozen over when I read that. So it's, Microsoft and the industry realised that it helps everybody if we collaborate on this stuff. So I think that the world has moved on.
Yeah,
and it's not a new idea, but it's
exactly.
And it ties into the Power Platform, right? So if we want our users to consume that data, it's complex getting to data, and trying to understand data in multiple systems is impossible for people that play in that game every day. So how do I then use Power Apps and data flows and be it point and click if we don't have that common agreement? So if you see CDS today, it's almost now a buzzword because it's involved in pretty much anything that you're going to be working on in either Dynamics or in Power Apps. And that's going to proliferate. So it really is a key or core topic, and it'll only grow. So it'll almost force people into playing together.
Oh, that's a super version of it that we'll wait and see.
So the last thing that kind of interested me was Power Platform in general. So I have a vested interest in this because I get a lot of work in that space. So I kind of have to know it a lot. Some of the things that have frustrated me in the Power Apps world is there's specific controls that I want to build that I couldn't before, well, now you can with the component framework. So this will be an interesting play in the next few years, I'd say. So if we look at where Nintex and K2, if you've ever used those as form builders and had to build any controls in that space, if you've ever used Telerik or any of those kind of things before, you're always having to build bespoke controls because the client wants something. Power Apps has 10 or 12 of them, which are kind of nice, but it makes it difficult to extend or use if you can't display something in exactly the way a business person wants to use it. So you're always going to need something where I can extend it. Otherwise, really, it hits its limit, and you're always going to have to go back to an MVC app or a .NET Forms app, and we really don't want to go into that world, because if people have spent a lot of time and effort in the Power Apps world, and then they get 80% of the way there and either have to compromise too much or start again, it grows the frustration, makes it more difficult for us as consultants to then promote it. So we need a way to extend Power Apps so that we can do what we need from it. So the component framework is well worth looking into. It really is a simple way to create a control. Once I've created that control, I can actually include it in any of my Power Apps going forward within my tenant. So not shared for everyone, it's mine. I get to use it, which is great. Things that I can do inside that world, I'm still trying to work out where the boundaries are, but there's some pretty good examples online as well on where you might want to extend something. So if we look at things around date pickers and time and things like that, if we want to look at some of the things I want to use with data and AI, I might want to present that in a certain way. So I want to be able to create my control that looks exactly the way I need it to look. So for my end user, I get the most benefit out of it. I thought this was kind of cool. Canvas model, you probably already know a lot about that. So where does portals fit in? So this will be the next wave, is Power Apps for portals. The Canvas and the model version of Power Apps are going to combine. So there'll only be one thing to choose. You won't have to do an and or an or. It'll just be I'm creating a Power App. And that Power App can then either be surfaced as a portal, or it can be for internal use as forms. And you'll make that determination as you're building. It won't be a selection option at the start. Yeah, so this is going to be interesting. There's still a little bit to go before portals part of Power Apps comes into it. So if we think about portals, there's going to have to be some type of anonymous access. There'll then have to be some type of B2B or B2C to connect to it. There'll have to be some type of registration mechanism to it. And then you want content management, right? So those kind of things there were kind of described high level during the talk, so there'll probably be more to come later. But the Canvas and model component to it, that's already starting. So
the Power Apps portal is the old Dynamics portal with a new design on it. All they've done is decouple it from Dynamics, so the entities to manage the portal are part of CDS now. So you can create portals directly off of XOM applications, basically. Yeah. But they've got the new designer on it, which is much more drag and drop user friendly.
Right. That designer did come out, but you could use a little bit of it, but you couldn't build anything with it. Yeah. But it gave you a glimpse of what was to come.
Yeah. Just one other thing on the component framework to mention. So the AI stuff that we showed, they are actually PCF controls. So Microsoft have created a business card scanner, for example, which is in the Dynamics app, and it's just a control you just drop on the form. So that's how that AI stuff works as well, which it is digital Lego. As I keep saying to people, you can stick a Power BI tool tile there, you can stick a form in Power BI, you can just really mix and match all these bits now.
Are they going to release PCM like a sort of a model that you can sort of buy third-party components?
Yes. So they're going to create a market for controls, basically. In the same way, like with Power BI, there's a custom visual that you can market. It's the same idea.
Did you see, was it last month's one? The one before, with Andrew Lee?
Yeah, that's why I thought it was a good follow-up.
Yeah, I think there was a GitHub or a website you can go to. This was a community-built one. What is it, PCM.gallery or something? But it's not Microsoft, but I'm sure Microsoft will come out with their own as well.
And they also announced you can use React as the language as well. So for those that are technically minded, the Power Apps is actually built using React.
Yeah, I think the schedule board and all the project service automation stuff's all React based.
There was a mixture at one time, but now React is the Microsoft standard for apps.
I think we get maybe.
One question on the canvas versus model. What's that going to do to the licensing? Because model-driven apps in P2 cost a fair bit more than canvas.
Yeah.
So is P1 something going to?
I don't know what the changes will be, but there is a whole. I mean, anticipating a whole load of announcements because there is also B2B and B2C power apps. Which will obviously have to change licensing. So whether there'll be a bring your own license or consumption-based license or something like that, I think there will be changes, but I just don't. They've kept completely silent on that till I guess till the new financial year.
Okay. Rightio. Well, look, Steve, thanks for that energetic presentation. You're way too excited for what you do, but and you've given me like 5 minutes.
Yeah,
so I appreciate that too. So what we've got till 6, but we've got to squeeze in questions, or do you want me to finish before then?
It's up to the group. I'm happy to stay longer. It's up to everyone else.
Oh, I'll just talk fast. That's all to get through the material. But
you can go like, if everyone's okay, 10 minutes over, be okay. Yeah, this one's
all right, no problem. Great. Well, look, there's so much content. I mean, as Steve said, I actually put my Strava on to go from one meeting room to the next, and it was over 2 kilometres to get between meeting rooms at this conference. It was really quite something. And then you'd plan your things out. You'd get to the room you thought you were in, but you're in the wrong building. So then you had to walk all the way back. But it was extremely well organised. It was a fun event. We certainly had a lot of fun. Our only criticism is, how much was squeezed into every day. We couldn't cover it all, and that was a real challenge. But it meant for a lot of throwing around ideas at the end of it all. Look, for me, there's 3 key things I was going to just touch on. The one version concept. While everyone's getting to grips with that, I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. The supply chain management and the investment and where that's going, and touch on a little bit on dual right. And then any other questions that you might have. So. Look, from a one version perspective, I come from that world of ERP where, upgrades were done every 2, 3, 4, maybe every 10 years, right? And you went through this process of, doing design and development and UAT, and every time you change something, you had to test it again and all those sorts of things. So, the whole process now of your software is going to be basically going through an upgrade every month. Is quite a paradigm shift, and the consequences of that for a system, an ERP system, is quite significant. And so, as a result, there's been a number of things that have had to improve for this to really be properly adopted. So, firstly, if I talk about the release cycle, that is it is a monthly cycle. However, you can pause, I think, up to 3 times. And what they've actually also done is every 3rd month is skipped. There's not a release on the 3rd month. So in the long story short is if you pause 3 times and in that picture, you can do a release twice a year rather than having to do it every month in the most extreme situation. That's probably great for businesses that are trying to get their head around the whole concept of doing a monthly release. However, the ideal would be to do that monthly release. Okay. However, to do that, you need a few controls around it. So obviously we are doing. Let me just progress that. So that's the monthly releases that I've just talked about. When a release comes through, you actually have a little bit of control when it's going to happen. I mean, if you are lazy and do nothing, it'll just automatically go into your system, and you've done no tests, no checking, and who knows what's going to happen. So what happens is through the Lifecycle Services engine, which is effectively the portal environment that manages the infrastructure of your environment, you can come in here and say when you want to actually release this into your UAT environment, because obviously you need to go in there first. And so while there's a timeline, you're given 2, 3, 4, 5, you've got a number of weeks before the cutoff to actually choose when you want it to go into your UAT, go through your testing, so that then you can allow it to then go into production. So there is an element of control around when those updates happen. Alternatively, you just let it do its thing.
This is for FinOps specifically?
This is specifically FinOps, yeah. So I'm sure at some point there will be some synergy. There is synergy around that the releases are happening, the cutoff at the same time, but this type of thing is a FinOps specific area. Yeah, the caveat here is I'm very FinOps centric, sorry. The next area is around feature management. So what I think with this release of a new update, there might be new features in that. And there's that potential problem that a new feature is coming into my system that I don't even know about or want to even turn on. And so there's now this facility to be able to turn a feature on. And so that what you're doing is by default, the feature's not on. You would get your new update, you would turn that feature on, check it's what you want, and then you turn it on in your own time. So the feature's there, it just may not be turned on in the release process. So again, you have that control. You get documentation about it, and this is relatively new, and so there's actually in the early instance of this not very many features because they're not doing it retrospectively. They're doing it on new features that are coming into the system. And then the last area is the regression test tool, and this is continually morphing and changing. And when I was there, I spent quite a bit of time going through this. I've been a little skeptical of this. I've tried it a number of times and found it really difficult to work with. I think it had lots of potential. It just needed to go that extra mile. And with what we're seeing in the product now, it really is closing the loop. And just very, very quickly, Finance and Operations has a task recorder tool. What it lets you do is hit a start button, record your steps, pause it. Now, it was originally designed to teach people how to use the system because you could play those task recordings back to a user. Well, what's now happened is you can now use those recordings to actually form the basis of an automated regression test. So you do your recording, but as you can imagine, if I want to do a repeated test, I might need to be able to chain two tests together, that the second test is using data from the first. So how do they solve that problem? I might want to have a fourth step or third step that validates what happened in the first step and compare two values. How do they solve those sort of problems? Because a regression test solution needs to be able to handle those sorts of things. So with that, the task recorder now can have that awareness. So you're able to snapshot parameters and fields so that they can be reused in subsequent tests. So you do your recordings, that's all great. Those recordings then go into the business process modeler, which is a feature within Lifecycle Services. All that really is a library of processes. So they get recorded, they get stored in the BPM, and then from there you sync those processes into DevOps as user stories. And so now we've got our DevOps environment that can describe what needs to happen and if necessary, development take place and all of those sorts of things. But if we're talking about testing, the last step is we then need to use a new tool, which has been out a little while now. It's the tool up on the right, the Regression Suite Acceptance Test, or I can't remember what, something like that. But what this does is it connects to DevOps. It grabs all those user stories and it will connect to your test environment, your UAT environment, whichever environment you want it to connect to, and execute those tests. But in the process, it's going to create your test suites and your test cases in Test Manager and record the results of those tests back in your Test Manager. And not only that, there's more. You actually get the results, the evidence of the test. You get the info logs. You get the screen captures of what happened throughout the process. And then you get your whether it's passed or whether it's failed. And if it's failed, you can go in and diagnose what the problem is. So there's quite a lot, it's not all point and click. There's a couple of things that you've got to do to connect all that together. But once those tests have been built and prepared, you can just reuse them. And the whole idea is that you get your new release, it goes into your UAT, you rerun your regression testing, you fix up and check if there are any areas, and then you move on. But then you can provide it a configuration file with all the data in it, if that data changes, if you want to repeat it with lots of different data. So it's a very important tool for the one version concept.
You know, similar stuff in Business Central? One version feature management. Anyone know?
No, not at this stage. No, I mean, I guess the landscape of Business Central is a lot skinnier. But look, I feel that all these systems, you know, Business Central, you know, Finance and Ops and D365 CE, all do very good things, and I think over time they're playing much better together, and they learn off each other. So what you'd expect to see is some of these things start morphing into the other area. Okay, supply chain management investment. Conscious of time, so I might spend a lot of time on this apart from just sort of telling you the exciting bits, and that is around planning optimization, asset management module, and integrated operations. So I'll skip over this one fairly quickly because I don't have a lot of detail on it at the moment, but the principle is a lot of areas within in an ERP system needs to do an element of forecasting and planning, and sometimes that involves some smarts outside of the system to do some predictive stuff, to do some what if and what have you. And so now there is a planning optimization service available that we can now integrate into Finance and Ops. And so it might be purchase planning, it might be manufacturing planning, it might be sales forecasting, all these different areas we can then utilize planning optimization. I won't go into a lot more detail apart from the fact that in the past, this wasn't necessarily a feature. People had to go out and do this in Excel, where now we can use an optimization engine that's able to now tap into AI and a number of the other services that are now available in Azure and across the web to be able to have intelligent predictive models that then can form the basis of forecasting. And that's been something that's been creeping in because we've been able to tap into the AI engine, but now it's a really important part. Asset management has been another significant change for me. I think in October this is going to be a significant release. Microsoft have now their own asset management module, which is basically everything in the green in the middle. All the grey on the left and right at the top there is the fixed asset module of finance and operations, essentially. And then in the middle, we've got all the components that we need to manage assets, manage asset lifecycle, and be able to then cover, you know, a component that the solution had quite a gap in. What else did I want to say about that? Well, the thing about this is if you've ever had any experience with field service and assets, and then you go, but hang on a minute, here's Finance and Ops trying to do assets, what's going on? And this is a very common situation. You know, these two products often play in each other's sandpit. And so I've got to say, my takeaway, one of my big takeaways from this particular conference was how the two products have been on their own paths, and it really feels like there's a coming together, you know, and we've seen some new features come in and go, what's that used for? And why are you introducing that? Or it's a nice idea, but it seems a bit out of place. But actually what's been happening is these products are now merging together much better. The whole story around CDM and CDS has been trying to get going, but now what we see is this powerful ability to have a common data model across all these different business systems. And so it's quite a powerful area. So when it comes to something like this, and with the concept of dual right that we saw last month, what it means is as finance and ops assets can talk to field service assets in real time with very common data entities. And from a user's perspective, it's not two different systems. It's now the one system. So it's been a really important transformation, I believe, and it's going to be an area that's that shows the two products coming together a lot quicker. As a result of bringing in asset management into the solution, what's able to happen with finance and ops is this new buzzword of intelligent operations. And it's a little bit like really, you know, where we were seeing D365 with insights and where that was going. We're now seeing that in an ERP operational system. And really, in a very simple summary, if you've got assets that do things and, you know, have a counter, do miles, whatever it might be that you're tracking, an asset management system is tracking that. It needs to track that to do preventative maintenance, to do predictive or reactive maintenance. And so by having this now all integrated, then the operational system and in this particular case, asset management, can actually take some proactive steps to protect the assets that it's looking after and ultimately ensure that the assets have a much longer life cycle. So with that, there is now connections that allow finance and ops to take direct data feeds from assets through IoT, and it's doing it through the IoT hub and the various services that are already available in the marketplace. So this is a huge area and is quite exciting to now see assets be able to come into the system, but actually take it to the next level almost in the same step. So, and then that's not just going to be limited to assets, but obviously that's a really powerful area that you're tracking that asset and its performance. Okay. Dual right. Look, we've touched a lot on dual right. You know, at the end of the day, the whole thing about dual right, it was interesting going, because I went to a lot of those topics, was it needs to be easy to use. And what they are ultimately trying to do is it's almost seamless the way CE and FO will connect together. It's going to take a little bit of time to get that point, but that's a big area. They're introducing the ability to actually do some filtering and transformation in that space. Because I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because we covered that last time, but it's growing at an incredible rate. I don't have another slide. So that's the dual right. You might have seen it. Did you use this one last time? So this is basically showing you how from both systems. So, you know, the CE environment is built directly on top of the CDS. So when we say CDS here, we're talking CE or any other data that's going into the CDS. But then that's doing direct writes into finance and operations. So these are synchronous in near real time. And equally on the other side, from FO into the CDS, we're able to do direct writes in near real time. These are direct entry writes, so it's quick. However, what I did discover is this has the ability to be aware that this is the first time you're syncing these two systems, and you've got 6,000 records here to sync. I'm not going to do it through a synchronous OData read. I'm actually going to go back to the data integrator that's much more geared to batch processing, and I'll actually batch the integration until that number comes down, and then it'll go back to that synchronous real time. So there's some smarts and some clever things going in there, because OData and synchronous is not great for huge volumes, and so they had to come up with one. Does it automatically, yeah. So
I think the first time you put up the run, that's the time it does that. But interesting thing on this one was CDS, and I think Munib did a very extraordinary presentation last time. But I think that whole CDS things, which to the extent I understood it can never go as far as transactional data or advanced level of data is concerned, where you have reservation logic or some complex logic. This is good as far as master data, config data is all good, but I don't see that it will go beyond where the actual data reserve or complex logic within the system is happening, that you will never be able to exchange between the systems.
Well, you might be able to exchange, but it might have a complication. Yeah. It may not be a good design decision. Yeah, agreed. Yep. This is just showing you an example of the whole thing that really Steve was talking about. These are the two data models of CE and FO, and the process that they're going through to harmonise them to come up with the same data model to share between the two. So it's just one example, but this is what they're having to do on all the products. So what's happened is, as of October, there will be, I think they're calling out 30 data entities that will be able to use through the dual write process. So they'll be directly synced between CE and FO, and it's things like customers and vendors, products, and something else that I can't remember. And then they actually have this roadmap to bring all the other modules in. And they want to move through this pretty quickly, because if you can imagine something like asset management that I talked about before, we're working with clients that really like the field service feature and need that in their operations. But they have warehousing and inventory, and the costing side of the projects that they're working on that CE doesn't do well, they need to get that into finance and ops as quickly as possible. And so the idea of bringing dual write into the asset management is really powerful, because it means that mobility, that ability to have that technician focused solution in field service, able to still feed data back into your finance and ops in a really timely fashion. Okay. That's about me done there. I could have talked for a lot more, but that's enough for now.
Time management's not a skill I have.
On one of the slides, you actually referred to it as Dynamics 365 Asset Management. Is that implying it's going to be a standalone product, kind of like Talent as well, or is it?
No, it's a module within
Okay.
finance and operations. Yep. Yeah, so one of the key things about that is the mobility of asset management. And if you can imagine, well, if we've got field service with mobility and asset management needs mobility, how's that going to be solved? So that's going to be addressed in October as how that will happen. But one way is the fact that the two products can integrate, or it's likely there'll be also one of the new power apps that allows you to do some of that asset management stuff out of finance and ops rather than field service, if necessary.
Very cool. Any more questions at all? That's it. Thank you guys. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Sharing knowledge, that's great. All right, so yeah, we've run out of time. Apologies, everyone. Next month, I think we're going to do a retail show session. Yeah. We have space for another session as well. So, guys, if you have any ideas or want to present, or know someone a customer that wants to come in and show off their stuff, get them in. I want to really try and fill up the agendas for the entire year, if that was possible. We've never done that before, but good if we could. There are a few. We've got Mark Smith coming in August, so he cancelled for tonight. Actually, the old appointment's still on my phone. He'll be talking about CDS, CDM stuff in a lot more detail in August, hopefully. So yeah, so we might rejig the. No, we might be able to squeeze. It's the 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd. Oh yeah, it might be. Yeah, I'll have to. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, cool. We'll have to adjust the date maybe slightly. Yeah,
what's the date of the next meeting, Ben? Because you've got March on the
Oh, sorry. Yeah, whoops. Must have been having sleep when I was updating this. Can anyone?
Long break.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
25th of July.
So I've not updated that. Be probably 25th. So we'll be back. Yeah, I'll send out some communications and have a discussion with the committee. Cool. All right, there's all the existing links that we've probably seen before. Thank you very much for coming. There's more drinks there. I think we've had a pizza, which is good.
Might be a couple of bits of pizza.
Yeah.
So
okay, cool. So thank you guys for coming. I know the weather's not too fresh on, but that was good.